Recommendal Podcast, episode 138, brought to you by executive producer Wes Cueto. Thank you very much for your support.
Something must have forced him over. Did you get anything out of the witnesses?
Yes, sir. Exactly the same story from all of them. Two motorcyclists jabbing at his tyre with a knife.
Any identification?
Yeah, the living dead again.
just heard We Live by Electric Wizard from the record We Live. And this is the Record Metal Podcast. I'm Mark.
And I'm Jason. And this must be part 2 of Electric Wizard.
Yes.
Rumor has it. If we're still playing Electric Wizard, it feels like we're still caught in the same fever dream that we talked about in part 1.
It's dropped about 6 degrees, but yeah.
And we had some Willy Wonka, the original, going on in the background. We just sort of added to the psychedelic swirl of everything else that was happening. But at the end of part 1, we sort of left off with Dope Throne back in 2000, which is, universally hailed as their sort of masterpiece. And now we sort of delve at the beginning part of part 2 here into murkier territory, I guess, for Electric Wizard and their fans and critics. And
well, as we kind of explained last time, there's a bunch of personal turmoil between the bands of either being arrested or having physical injury or drug addiction, all that kind of stuff.
Well, and then they go on some ill-fated tours around this time. They did one of the first major tours of the U.S. With Warhorse, and then
they headlined it, all right?
Yeah, they did.
And then so long ago.
And then Cathedral brings them out in 2002, right around the time that they released their next record, which is Let Us Pray. Even though we started with We Live from 2004, the first record we are going to talk about is Let Us Pray in 2002. And as Mark said, this is kind of the sound of a band kind of falling apart. It's really tough, I think, to follow up a masterpiece like Dope Throne. Like, what do? You can't get heavier. You can't get more distorted. You can't get more apocalyptic. So,
but you can get pissed off.
What direction do you go? Well, you get that a little bit, but you also get a little bit more experimental. I mean, I think this is probably the record where they take the most chances, and some of them work and some of them don't. You've got a song like We the Undead, which really has like a I Hate God sort of sludgecore punk vibe to it, and that pissed a lot of fans off. Like, they were kind of like, what the fuck, you've never had those punk roots in your music, why are you doing this now? They have an instrumental tune near the end of the record called Night of the Shape, which features like saxophone and piano kind of stuff kind of going on, and it almost hints at like kind of trip hop, which was like kind of big around that time. Massive Attack and Portishead and those sort of bands, and that pissed some people off who weren't maybe forward looking. And I think these are 3 guys that don't really like each other anymore, and they're sort of desperate to sort of shed Dope Throne and all the sort of like probably good and bad that record brought. All of a sudden there's a spotlight on them. There's suddenly an expectation that was never there prior, because nobody really gave a shit what Electric Wizard did prior to that.
Yeah. At this point, there's tons of acclaim, and I think Just basically writes everything in the band as well. So a lot of it was probably him just trying to keep it all together from completely flying off the rails.
And not having help with these 2 guys that are in ill health, they're barely alive, these guys, and it's a mess. I mean, it really, like I said, it's a band that seems to not really know where they want to go, and just doesn't quite know what to do with his vocals. One of the things about this record, Let Us Pray, is the vocals are the most distorted they've been, and that annoyed a lot of fans. Because you'll have a song like Priestess of Mars, which has some freaking amazing hooks in it, and it's one, if we had more time, I would have loved to have played, but it is what it is. And yet, like, it's just so raw. It almost has like some pop melodies to some of the vocal or to some of the guitar hooks, but then everything like singing wise is just so like rough, and I don't know, it's a strange record, and that's all I can say. I mean, I have a lot of love for this record because at the time when it came out, this is 2002, where I'm still like really invested in, we're still doing Eclipse. Mm-hmm. I'm still invested. I'm still working pretty much full time at the record store. I remember listening to this record actually a lot when I was finishing up my pre-student teaching classes, and I would have to sit at the library at CMU and print off not just the library, but also the computer lab, and we had to do like crazy lesson plans, and we had to print copies for every single person in the class, and our lesson plans, like mine were 35 pages, and so I had to print 20 copies of 35-page lesson plans. I remember Susie, a friend of ours, was at the computer lab at the same time, and she was like, "What the fuck are you doing?" I'm like, "I've been here for like 6 hours," and I just remember listening to this on my Discman. Yeah, there's a date. My Discman, pre-iPod. But so I really did kind of get into this record. And, Terrorizer, as I was telling Mark earlier, gave it 10 out of 10, which Terrorizer doesn't give that stuff out. But I think with the American public, this record just it wasn't Dope Throwing Part 2. And so people don't really know what to do with it,
Yeah. Which, it seems to be a kind of a recurring thing with a lot of bands that hit a pretty, big peak that's really hard to, I think, get back to again, or like, what do you even do after that kind of point? I always got that kind of, it wasn't the sophomore slump in this instance, but still the expectation is like, it seems like a lot of the bands actually like do counter expectation.
Sure. And I think too, like, one of the things that's weird is like, I think British fans seem to be like, traditionally throughout all music genres, seem to be like more forgiving of experimentation than do American fans. I think American record fans, whether it be metal or non-metal, are much more fickle, in terms of stuff like that. Like they're
I think the pop music and stuff in Europe though is so grossly different than it is.
It's true.
Over here, like across the board, it can be really like poppy, or it can be really like electronic and just
dark
weird.
Yeah.
So it seems, I think maybe they just have a higher threshold for that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and certainly like Wizard really pushes that threshold with it, And the tune we picked out to play is it's an instrumental, which is I think you don't get distracted by the over distorted vocals with it, but it's Masters of Alchemy, and it's really super hypnotic, really super groove laden.
It's got like a subtitle as well, doesn't it?
I don't know if this one does. Masters of Alchemy. Oh yeah, it does. I'm sorry. House of Whipcord, the Black Drug.
Yeah.
Who the hell knows what's going on there? But it's got this really awesome, sinister main riff that just like kind of continuous, kind of takes you on a cool like little cosmic journey, and it really tells a story, which is cool, for an instrumental. And sometimes some of the instrumentals that these guys have done up until this point are so sprawling that they almost like lose themselves in the narrative. They're just sort of like so out there.
They're all like like Drug Dreams or something. There's no. It almost seems like, okay, we had 2 riffs for this, right? All right, go. And then they just said, but how long was that? Oh crap, it's 13 minutes.
Yeah, but this one I feel is a little tighter. They're starting to rein in some of their songwriting, which you'll really start to hear when we get into We Live, which of course you heard that opened things up. And so I guess we should talk about We Live alongside Let Us Pray, because these are, I guess, the 2 major transitional records, because Let Us Pray is the last record with the original lineup. Yeah,
and then we come to We Live, and we get what is it, Rob Alyssa or Al Issa
on bass,
and then Liz Buckingham. I believe she was in the band 13.
She may have been in 13. I know for sure she was in Sour Vein, and that's where Just met her when he was on tour over in America, and he met her, and he said like he wanted her in his band, that first and foremost, and then of course they started dating, and then
I think they're married, aren't they?
Yeah, they're married now, and then they had to live in America for a while in order for him to get like all the British citizenship paperwork taken care of. So they were like living with her folks for a while and stuff.
Yeah, I remember hearing that about that.
But yeah, so we get a second guitar player, Liz Buckingham, which is really going to develop the sound. And as you heard in We Live, there's more layering and
complexity stuff's happening. Like there's actually, I guess he doesn't have to worry about keeping the wall of sound going because you've got the rhythm guitarist, so he can actually be a little bit more, not thoughtful about stuff, but I think he's a little bit more sparing with notes and stuff. It doesn't all have to be out there now.
Yeah. And you get Justin Greaves for this record from Iron Monkey on drums.
Yep.
And one of the things that's interesting about him drumming wise on this record, and I often say this, but I think Justin Greaves is almost too good for the band. And in fact, Just sort of said that. He said that like that was one of the reasons they had to get rid of him, because Justin Greaves was like way more kind of into like hardcore and punk and non-metal sort of things, and these guys are like tried and true metal heads. Like that's what they kind of wanted to do. And so even though like the drumming is really dynamic, which is cool, it's neat to hear that on at least one Electric Wizard record, Just sort of said like he was like too good for the band. It's almost like Mike Smale
on the first Cathedral record, from Penance, where he didn't know he couldn't play that slow, so he had to do a bunch of fills.
yeah.
And I feel sorry for like Mark Ramsey Wharton, who has to come in and then play all that crap live. But
but so you've got a new lineup completely, and I don't know. I think We Live. You mentioned this is a record you never really owned.
I still don't own it, actually. I've got MP3s, but I don't own the record.
Yeah.
It was just at a time when I don't know, 2004.
Well, it was really underrated. I don't think it got much spin. From me, it didn't. I barely listened to it, and then I kind of file it away. You know, now it's kind of become one of my favorites as I've sort of had to pull it out in order to get prepared for not only for this show, but just in like the last year or so. And it's really a band at the crossroads. You know, even though you got a new lineup, what do you do with this new lineup? You've got like new opportunities for creativity and things like that, and Just doesn't want to go back to what he did on Dope Throne and Let Us Pray, so he kind of he really sort of spreads his wings, especially vocally on this record.
Oh yeah, this is kind of the first where we see his, it kind of progresses through the next couple records, but his vocal rise to prominence and more, it seems like more confidence where he doesn't have to like drench them in distortion or gain or anything or overdrive. Yeah, and there's some really nice, he kind of sings his heart out in the title track that you heard, the We Live. There's some nice kind of harmonies and hooks that are sort of in there. And you also get more room for guitar solos because you have the second guitar player, in Liz Buckingham. And one of the tunes I really did want to play was a long tune, a 15-minute song called Saturn's Children, which might be one of their, if not their greatest kind of like epic song. It's a lot more dynamic than say like Super Coven. Like it's got some sweet vocal things going on. It's got almost like a later day Jimi Hendrix type style of cosmic kind of playing. I mean, it's not as talented as Hendrix, but it's got that same sensibility of like heavy sort of drenched kind of Voodoo Child type stuff that Hendrix was doing on his last record, Electric Ladyland. But it's cool. It's a really neat tune. I know it's a fan favorite from a lot of people, but we kind of had to ixnay the 15-minute song. That's excessive.
It's pretty long. But the tune we did pick out to play from We Live, along with the title track, is Eko Eko Azarek, Part 1 Invocation, Part 2 Ritual. And this might have my favorite sort of hypnotic vocal hooks during the Eko Eko Azarek kind of part. And it's really clean, it's nice, and hooky, in a way that he's never sort of attempted. And I guess you mentioned Psychomania earlier, didn't you?
Yes.
That's where you get the We Live. We just opened up with. It was the Psychomania sample.
Oh, that sample in the beginning.
Yeah. So, but so this is a big stretch for him. And even though Just doesn't really like this record, I think it was sort of cathartic and necessary for him to sort of get this record out of the way. And it's
the first time with basically a new band, especially when you're kind of sharing the limelight with another guitar player.
Yeah.
Which I don't remember if she co-wrote any songs on this record or not. She hasn't consecutive ones.
Not yet, but yeah, I think she'll do it on the next one. Because I think I remember reading an interview today, the Witchcult era, and he said like this is the first time like I actually had Liz and the others write songs with me, because he basically kind of, I don't want to say brought him in as rogue agents, but he kind of the guys quit and he just had to assemble a band.
Well, he probably wanted to keep them at arm's length because these other guys are fuck ups. Why?
Why trust these guys
if
until
you're
I know
the
they were
the band?
So but I don't know, maybe just someday we'll come around to it, and maybe you guys, I don't know, it's got a really high rating actually when you go around and look at it, which I was surprised. I thought this would be the record that would be slagged by a lot of people because it just, like you said, didn't get any promotion.
I don't remember hearing much about it at all.
But people seem to generally kind of like it and warm up to it. It is a warm record vocally and things like that, so it's maybe,
I think the new generation of Wizard fans that are going back and rediscovering
it's an easy one to get into. Dope Throne and Come My Fanatics and some of that stuff, that's pretty impenetrable for like the new Doom listener. So but so we've got Master Alchemy from Let Us Pray from 02, and then like I said, we've got Eko Eko Azarek, Invocation Ritual from We Live. Enjoy. Eko Eko Azarek, master of alchemy. Every time I say Eko Eko Azarek, I feel like I'm like doing something from Empire Strikes Back, like Echo 1, Echo 2.
Oh, it kind of reminds me of a Harry Potter spell.
It could be, yeah, could be. Patronus. Never mind.
Isn't Patronus some kind of fancy liquor? That's Patron.
Patron, yeah. Patronus is the little, when they're fighting Dementors, and here it's the spell that makes the little animal that chases off the Dementor.
The spirit animal that I witnessed today.
Spirit animals, yes. Yeah. Of course, in our sweat lodge, we're seeing, rabbits and deer and stag and shit like that.
Help me find my car keys today.
So, as you mentioned, after We Live, he kept these guys kind of at a distance, but then he finally, Justin Greaves leaves, and we get the new drummer.
Sean Rudder, interesting fella. He looks like Anton LaVey.
He does.
And from my recollection, the last, this is a couple months ago now, the Wizard cover of...
the Black Masses one, right?
Yeah, from Decibel. Apparently this guy lives in a shack and makes sails for sailboats or something. A really weird kind of trade that you wouldn't think people in this day and age would still do, but yeah, he's an interesting character, apparently very antisocial.
Yeah, which probably fits really well with these guys,
Yeah, he's probably just really into the drumming, and then when he's done, he leaves.
Yeah,
and goes make sales or whatever he does.
That's funny. But he kind of fits perfect, and I think the last two records are sort of proof positive that I think with We Live, you could argue that We Live is sort of like Mach 2 of Electric Wizard. It's like sort of the second beginning of this band, and I think
they're trying to find their feet again to some degree. And I think this is the record where this one actually got quite a bit of praise, kind of heralded as a comeback record and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and maybe it was in some ways, but I don't. The thing about Electric Wizard, and this is what's great about doing an Electric Wizard show, is we don't ever have to look at any of the records and go, oh man, what are we going to have to play from this thing?
Yeah.
There's no such thing as an Electric Wizard dud. Like, I can put on any Electric Wizard and enjoy the shit out of it, for different reasons, Even the first one, which is pretty, like, standard kind of doom stuff, it has its, like, moments,
Well, similar to our last two-parter, like Primordial, that's another band that they don't really have bad duds. Apple in a bunch.
Nothing bad, And, but I think Witchcult today is like a great refinement of what they were trying to start, with We Live.
It's kind of almost a throwback to Dope Throne to some degree, that kind of songwriting, but it's more mature and it's not as noisy.
Yeah, it's not as noisy, but it's really drenched in like analog. Like it's almost like this and Black Masses are very 70-ish.
Oh yeah, for sure.
In a way.
And you're actually, there's not like the guitars don't seem quite so overdriven. It seems like almost like Sabbath demo kind of stuff. Like they tried to go back. I'm not sure about the recording process either, but it seems like a very, more cut and dry, using fewer microphones, fewer overdubs if they do that kind of stuff. And
I think
it's very 70s sounding.
I think too, like on a song like Dunwich, which we're going to open up with, like I hear a lot of that sort of like that catchy aspect that Pentagram was able to achieve, like on Relentless.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
And there's an economy in songwriting too, which is like good for them finally to get to a point where, the three songs we're going to play, Dunwich, Satanic, Rites of Drugula, and Torquemada 71, are all less than 7 minutes. In fact, like two or, like 6 minutes or less, which is...
It's almost pop song length.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really big step for these guys in order to, like streamline their songs a little bit, not be as... I don't want to say as lazy, but I almost feel like, it just seems like with these new guys, he's at a point where he's working with like really professional people, not just like fuck ups, that like he started the band with, and so he's able to like put together some great songs, Dunwich in particular. This is one of my favorites, along with We Hate You. It's really like overdriven and that awesome drum beat, and I want to throw this out to you and see if you notice it too. It totally reminds me of She from Kiss. Totally.
You get that,
it's got that total like, and even like some of the like dun 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 dun. It just has like a weird.
The drums are way more simple. Yeah, I think it's more.
Well, no more Justin Greaves, as they said. Who was
but even even the previous drummer, I think things were a little bit more. It seemed like more beats per minute than were needed.
Well, and he was really like almost loose and like almost free jazzy sometimes, because the music was so loose and like.
Yeah,
organic or.
But I think Rudder sprawling. Kind of he's almost kind of like cements them in place, while everybody else can kind of like flail out a little bit. He's there as the anchor of the band now.
And you hear it a lot in like a song like Dunwich, which is rooted in that, like, just that catchy ass drum beat and that great sort of vocal chorus, you know, that just is over. It almost sounds like a song on overdrive too. It's cool, like the way it sounds, but yet it's poppy in a sense too.
And which coming up on Black Masses, they kind of even push it that much further. It almost reminds me of like the sensibility of a 50s recording.
Yeah, well, it's really Black Masses in particular is like I want to say it's like cloudy, but it's like reverby, but yet it's warm. It's like super warm.
Yeah,
but it's like it's almost like there's like
it seems like
a fog over like a lot of the songs in a way.
Well, and plus, if you this is one thing that if you listen to the CD, it's much more clear.
Yeah.
The MP3, denigration of the sound, the compression, everything kind of messes with it. But it sounds to me almost like if they're all playing in a room somewhere all together, and then they had microphones about 15 feet away.
Yeah.
Where you hear most of everything, but it's not as punchy and specific as it were if it was mic close.
Yeah, and I think that's why, and when we get into Black Masses, we'll talk a little bit more about that record in the last set. But yeah, it's a less immediate record, and almost, like you said, almost probably the way it was recorded, it's less immediate. It's not as like directly recorded or something. You know, it's I don't want to say it's distant, but it's just it's a different way of sort of sounding.
For some weird reason, it reminds me of like a Roy Orbison record played really loud, and you're recording it in the other room.
Yeah,
I could like see through a wall, kind of you get the weird echoey kind of stuff going on with the voice.
I can kind of see that. Yeah. But besides Dunwich, on Witchcult stuff, we're gonna hear Satanic Rites of Drugula, which has some of like the coolest like freaking great lyrics, and actually Dunwich does too. Like the chorus to Dunwich, it's Dunwich is a H.P. Lovecraft song, so connecting back to it's all like a reference to some story like Dunwich, you look like your father. Dunwich, like you'll make the world pay in misery or something like that. And I don't know the story of Dunwich.
I don't know that one either,
but it sounds cool, like just from that chorus line, but Drugula in particular just plays around with a lot of cool like metaphors and different things in terms of like the chorus, you know. I mean, it's like you said earlier, it's kind of mocking, instead of Drugula kind of thing.
Well, and there's even I was looking around on YouTube for video interviews of the band, and there's like 5 or 6 different like how to play this song, by other people, like, oh, here's how you do it, how to play the Satanic Rites.
That's cool. Yeah, and it seems to be, this and Dunwich are kind of like 2 of their more popular songs, I think, of the modern era of Blizzard.
It's in a lot of their live sets, I know now.
Yeah, I'd like to see them, and hopefully we will, because they're scheduled to play Maryland Death Fest next year.
Yep.
Which is pretty sweet. And then the last tune we're going to play from Witchcult in this next set is Torquemada 71, and that's got kind of like almost like at the very beginning, like a I Hate God tone to it. Mm-hmm. And it's almost like one of the things that's happening on this record is there's some more rock and roll vibe to a lot of things, to the songwriting, like it's
not
not
how it's stripped down.
Yeah, it's not so like
shorter songs.
It's not so consciously like we have to be like metal or drone metal or whatever.
Yeah.
Like they're just letting like stuff evolve. And this is a perfect example where it's got like more of that same kind of sludgy punk hardcore rock and roll sort of thing that a lot of like I Hate God's like best songs kind of have underneath them.
Kind of punchy.
But the tune Torquemada 71, this is pretty interesting. Torquemada was the name of the sort of the most famous like torturer during the Inquisition, the Spanish Inquisition and the Catholic Inquisition and stuff. That was the name of the guy.
I think I've seen, there's some Stuart Gordon movie, I think, that's based on
I think so. Yeah, he's the Grand Inquisitor.
Yeah, Jeffrey Combs is in it.
But 71 is the year that Just was born.
Okay.
And so when Just smokes a lot of pot, he envisions sometimes that the Torquemada of the Middle Ages is reborn as himself in 1971, is like walking around. So it's like his bizarre like time travel like fever drug thing. So I don't know, that's
interesting.
So that's what Torquemada 71 is a reference to. It's not 1571 or 1671, it's 1971 that the year Just was born. So, and then we're going to sort of close things out in this set with the first of a pair of tunes that we're going to play from the aforementioned Black Masses record, and it's the title track Black Mass, which kicks off the whole record, and we'll talk a little bit more about that when we come back. So enjoy. Mass, Torquemada 71, Satanic Rites of Drugula, and Dunwich. And the first three there from Witchcult Today from 2007, and then the last one, of course, from the latest.
Black Masses.
Yeah, and this is one. This one kind of got, I don't want to say mixed reviews, but even some of our closest friends who are traditionally like big-time Wizard fans have struggled with this record a little bit.
Yeah,
to get into it.
I don't really get it, to tell you the truth. I mean, I think
it's less immediate. To me, it was a grower. There weren't as many songs that jumped out right away, but like now I really like the record a lot, and it flows really well.
But even, like Turn Off Your Mind, or
Turn Off Your Mind is great.
The opening track, I mean, they're so catchy. It's just, maybe it's just they're not, it doesn't have the same kind of huge volume that they're used to. I mean, it's kind of like an older, wiser, Wizard on this record, but I really actually like the production quite a bit, especially when you're listening to it on CD. And this is all these I would prefer to listen on CD. The lower end stuff gets cut out a little bit, but the new record, just for some reason I always go back to that. It feels like 1950s production, like if they went into the studio with the traditional setup of a 1950s, wherever you'd go and record your pop single.
Yeah.
And they sit down, kind of set up and record this thing.
Almost like a Sun Records kind of thing or something. Like, just like a real simple studio. And almost
like, singing in a can kind of thing. Is how it's got that kind of vibe. It seems like it's just stripped down to the bare minimum. Even like changing up the production like that, it doesn't like make it unelectric Wizard to me.
Yeah. No,
like their sound is just going to come through no matter how it's recorded.
And I think songs like Black Mass that you just heard, and then Turn Off Your Mind, which we'd love to play, but we actually played it the 2010 best of, and so we didn't want to double dip. But that's probably my favorite song on the record is Turn Off Your Mind.
Yeah, just the vocal hook is fantastic.
Yeah, that's great. And speaking of other vocal hooks, another song if we had more time to play would be Patterns of Evil, and that's got some cool vocal hooks as well. I mean, there are some songs that are a little bit more I don't want to say instrumental, but like kind of more sprawling kind of tunes, a little more free form and stuff. And in fact, one of the songs that we're going to end with tonight, Saturnine, it's probably the heaviest song on the record and kind of like the most sinister in terms of like, the way it sounds, but it's also more like epic and longer kind of form than some of the stuff that's on the record.
There's finally like a good mix, I think. It's not all these huge sprawling epics.
Yeah, like Dope Throne. Dope Throne's a hard record to pull out. For it being as famous as it is, it's a hard record to pull out and want to listen to. You got to almost be like in a mood to really want to absorb. I mean, my gosh, what is it, like 65 minutes or something? I mean, that's a lot of doom coming at you. Whereas, like, I feel like with Black Masses and Witchcult and We Live and stuff like that, you can pull like a couple songs off and get what you need out of it and not feel obligated to necessarily like envelop or lose yourself into like a whole hour's worth of like just muddy oppression, an apocalyptic sort of bleakness. And
so if it's really hot outside, put on a blanket and then listen to Dope Throne.
Yeah, but I don't know. I think that's, if I had a criticism of Dope Throne, it's somewhat inaccessible. And I'm not taking anything away from it because it's probably ultimately maybe my favorite Wizard, but I don't put it on as much. It's almost like Jane Doe from Converge.
I've heard it so many times too, and I've penetrated it so deeply that it's something I don't necessarily have to go back to and listen to that much.
But do you know how Jane Doe is so like oppressive and noisy in its own weird way that it's hard to like say to yourself, "Oh my God, I want to sit down and just like damage myself with Jane Doe."
Yeah, I want to hear home record right now.
yeah. But like, whereas like with Converge, I can pull like stuff off their like last three records, like even just like a song or two, and be totally satisfied, and it hits me, and I'm not beaten up or like, oh my God, I got a headache because I listened to all of Jane Doe or all of Dope Throne or whatever. So I think that's the direction they're going in. I think it kind of works, and to have more variety and to have some of those like those great vocal hooks that you're hearing on Witchcult and We Live and Black Mass is hopefully the future of where these guys are going to go. And if they can take that sound that they were experimenting with Black Masses and combine it with maybe more immediate sort of songwriting stuff like with Dunwich, I mean, I think they're going to find like that perfect formula.
Yeah.
So it'll be kind of interesting to see what comes next from these guys, because they're kind of due for an evolution. They've been sort of in this one since like 2004. So
yeah, I think that's why this new record kind of, I was like, this is what I needed to hear from them.
Yeah, because I think you're right. They'd probably taken that one the Mach 2 sort of as far as it could go, and so maybe Black Masses will be looked at as sort of the beginning of Mark 3 or whatever of Electric Wizard. But yeah, so let us know what you thought. We had a lot of fun doing this. I know it was cool for me to pull out some of the records I maybe hadn't listened to for a long time, like Come My Fanatics and We Live and stuff like that.
I listened to Come My Fanatics about 4 times in the last couple of days because I hadn't put it on in probably 7, 8 years.
Yeah,
it's been a long time.
Yeah, and this stuff holds up well. Like I said, it's a band that you can't go wrong wherever you start with them. But let us know what you thought about the Wiz. Maybe not the
Wizard,
not the 1978 Michael Jackson Diana Ross musical, but the Electric Wizard, in fact. Let us know what era you prefer, and maybe there was an album that you were let's say cold to prior to some of these podcasts, and maybe you've warmed up to a little bit with a little bit of hindsight or some new perspectives, and because that's kind of why we do this stuff. Exactly. It gives us new perspectives a lot of times, and I find myself more surprised by the things that I end up enjoying. And then some things that I thought I used to love that sometimes I'm like, I don't know.
Tragedy.
Well, I'll still support the third record, which doesn't have and that's the one you haven't really listened to much.
Well, I haven't. I used to support the first record, but it's a colossal pile of shit. I'll tell you what.
That was pretty awful. We should do a whole podcast on records that used to be awesome that have just gone down the shitter.
No, we just completely lost
play a song from, it could be kind of interesting.
I don't know how many of those I have left.
We could probably dig some up on Blogspot. But so let us know. Shoot us an email at requiempodcast@gmail.com, or check us out on Facebook, Mark and Jason, on our website, requiempodcast.com, or on iTunes. And you too can become an executive producer. And we got merchandise too.
We do. You can get. We've got travel mugs. We have iPhone cases. We have T-shirts. Whatever your desire, with a Baphomet on it.
We got it. Yes. And and in honor of Dunwich and H.P. Lovecraft, as I mentioned in part 1, If Mark's still up for Kickstarter funding by the time this airs, it might be over though by the time this comes. It might be damn close.
It could be, but you can go look at it and say, what a good boy is he. And if you'd like to donate, or if you have donated, thank you very much. It's right on the sidebar of requiempodcast.com. And you can help me fund my book.
Sure.
Fund a dream.
We appreciate it. And maybe there will be some more Metallic Dreams down the road on Kickstarter.
There will be.
We've mentioned that in past episodes. So enjoy Saturnine, some sprawling epic wizard to sort of close things out from 2010's Black Masses, excuse me. So I am Jason.
And I'm Mark.